Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about Azure management groups and how we use them to manage our Azure cloud platforms at scale. Um, and we'll be talking through some of the best practices, Microsoft guidance. We've also got some demos on policy. We're going to cover policy assignments, exclusions, role-based access, custom roles, as well as how do we manage management groups using code. We'll have a demo of that as well. So there's a lot in this session here. So hopefully you find it useful. So that we'll move to the slides. So we'll start here with what is a management group. So if we look at the slides here, so what is the management group? So this is kind of an example of what it might look like. So everyone who's using the Azure platform will have a tenant root group that's created as part of your Entra ID or Azure AD, we'll call that. Inside there, you've got a tenant root group. That's the root group where so any new subscriptions that you create will by default get dropped into there. That's one of the default settings that we can change as well. The guidance is that we do that, and we'll show you that in a second. Underneath that, you've got your company name, and you may also have sandbox and landing zones. So the landing zones area is where you put the user workloads, and in this case we've got corporate, so like internal systems, and online. So underneath there is where you place your Azure subscriptions, and that's where your resources go. Okay, so if you think of management groups as containers for organizing those subscriptions, and it's enterprise grade management at scale, and you'll be able to see how that works in the next few slides here. So the main reason we do that and we group them this way is for governance and management and also access control. So this slide shows the default settings. So by default, everything sits in the tenant root. So any new subscriptions, as I mentioned, goes into your tenant root. And this kind of guidance in the CAF, which is a Cloud Adoption Framework, which is guidance from Microsoft on best practices. We'll show you where that is and how to navigate that at the end of this as well. So you might want to change what the default management group is and also look at the permissions for managing these groups as well. So by default, anyone can manage them. So we tend to switch this thing on. So only people with the right permissions, specific permissions to do that can then manage management groups. So we'll come on to what that might look like in a moment. So let's look at some of the typical things that we see. So we do a lot of Azure reviews. We do a lot of work with high security government environments, whether it's a government body, it could also be a healthcare, private healthcare, public healthcare, as well as financial institutions as well. So in all these cases, security is a really high priority. So we make sure that the platforms are as secure as they can be. And we tend to do a lot of reviews as well. So and we will always find areas for improvement as well. So the things that I'm showing you here, this is an example, and we've not come across a single environment yet that's got everything that I'm going to talk about in this session in place. So hopefully this will be useful for people. Okay, so an example is what we find in the tenant root is right at the top level. What we can do is grant role-based access. So access can be granted there and it filters all the way down through the tenant root to any management groups that may exist down to the subscription and the resources. What we tend to find is that people have just set up owners at that level, so which means anybody can do whatever they want in the environment, and there's no management group, so things are not really organized correctly. And there may be one or two management groups, but it's not necessarily as the Microsoft enterprise scale best practices as well. So we'll show you what that looks like. You'll tend to find user and platform workloads, so all the networking may sit in the same subscriptions, might be split by resource groups, but they'll kind of sit in the same area as well as dev workloads and test workloads. But we'll show you how that can be organized properly later. So that's kind of a typical environment that we see. So let's move on to the next bit, which kind of shows you a best practice layout of how to organize your subscriptions and management groups. So Microsoft call this the enterprise scale model. In here, you can see a further breakdown of management groups. So we've got your customer root here. If I point there, you've got your customer root there. And then you've got your landing zone, so your user workloads in there. And you've got external and corporate, or internal, you can call it. You've also got a platform one on this side as well. So you use this for your platform environment. So anything like shared services, such as any identity systems, you may have Active Directory, for example, or ADDS or AD Connect. Management systems as well. That could be things like automation, patching solutions, and many other things. And then you have your connectivity. So this is where we have a hub and spoke network typically, and in your hub, you place that in your connectivity area, and that's where your shared services such as firewalls, VPN gateways, or express route circuits would sit inside that area there. So we can see from here, it can be flexible as well. So Microsoft don't say, oh, you must do it like this. It's kind of a standard best practice to help you manage this stuff at scale without making it too complicated. Okay, so if we come back to those permissions and the settings at the management group level, so if we look at the settings here, we can typically change this to a sandbox subscription ID. So you've got some element of governance and control over where your new subscriptions may land. Generally, we see your Visual Studio subscriptions get created and they all land in the root, but you may not want them in there. Also, we switched this one on, as I mentioned earlier, just to make sure only the right people have got access to manage these groups. Okay, so let's look at how do we isolate environments. So the best practice is really to isolate them via a subscription as well. So when we say environments, we're talking about things like if you've got a service and you've got dev, UAT, production, for example, the best way to isolate those would be really at the subscription level rather than resource group level, just to give you that bit more control and a bit more isolation with the policies and role-based access as well. Microsoft also say don't necessarily create management groups for each of those environments, just put them in under the right place, and also consider using the sandbox for dev, UAT and tests. So we'll just look at that next. So this is the Microsoft guidance for that. So what they say is you look at the potential use of a sandbox. So we've got a sandbox management group, as we've seen in the enterprise scale model. You can put your developer workloads in there, and some best practices for policy control as well. So what you can do is you can apply something called a policy, which we'll look at in a moment, to say anything in this environment is not allowed to connect back to your shared platform networks, for example. So you can't connect these to your on-premises networks or your firewalls or your Active Directory. And that kind of gives you that level of isolation. So if your workloads can work in isolation, it's a good idea to put them in the sandbox environment. If, for example, they do need some of the shared services, then you can also put them under the relevant management group as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about policy-based governance. So an example here could be, so this little blue symbol thing here with the grey line around it, we could call that a policy assignment. So policy really is a definition, and that definition does a check, and then it will either do multiple things, and one of them could be just do an audit. I just want to know about if something happens or if something gets created, or deploy something as well. So we can also call that a DINE, a deploy if not exists. So if something gets deployed, we want to add something else. So let's say, for example, there's a new subscription, somebody creates a virtual machine, and there's no backup vaults in that subscription, for example. What we can do is we can create a policy, then go and create a backup vault in that subscription for that virtual machine, for example. In this case, we'll look at allowed locations, right? So we can create a policy definition that says only allow users to deploy resources in a specific region. Now, Azure today, as of 2023, has got 60 regions around the world. And by default, there's nothing in the platform stopping you from deploying anything you want, wherever you want. So that's where policy control comes in. Now, the higher you apply that, and that will be inherited all the way through, and you can exclude those things if you like. So what we're talking about here is assigning an allowed location policy, telling it we're only going to allow specific regions. So in the case of some of the customers that we work with, whether it's healthcare or private banking, for example, they may only require they may have rules in their organization saying nothing can be stored or nothing can exist in our IT cloud environment outside the UK. And what you can do is set a UK policy up here saying allowed locations, and you can have a list of locations. In this case, you can say UK South, UK West only. If anybody tries to deploy something anywhere under that tree, they will be denied, and we'll show you that in a moment as well. So the scope is where that policy is set and everything is inherited underneath it. So if we can see that here, so I've applied that allow locations here, and we see that policy has been inherited all the way down to the subscriptions here, and we'll kind of give you a little demo of what that looks like. So we can see nobody in any of these subscriptions, because that policy is applied up here. It will be assigned everywhere. So sometimes what we see is that policy has been applied, but it could be applied at the wrong level. It could be applied only here, which means somebody over here, sorry, on this screen. So what we see sometimes is that policy has been applied, but it might have been applied at the wrong scope. So that somebody could have put it under landing zones, but that doesn't stop anybody in Sandbox, for example, or the platform area to create resources anywhere in the world. So what we'll do is we'll give you a quick demo of that now. So we can create anything that we want all around the world. By default, there's nothing in the platform to stop us from doing that. So I'll switch over to our Azure portal. So what we're going to do here is take a look at our management groups here. So this is just a basic management group. You can see things in the root, and what we'll do is we'll reorganize this using code later on. So if I want to create something, I could go into my resource group here. And if I go to, let's say, resource groups, for example, and let's go and create a virtual network. And let's do create. I'm going to create a new resource group, call that RG-VNet JPNW, for example. Let's create a VNet in Japan. Let's see if it lets me do it. Infra prod JPNW. So yep, here we've got Japan West in there. I'll just hide myself for a second. Okay, so what we do then is go to review and create. It's going to do some checks. Is there any policies in the platform at the moment that says I can't do this? So we can see this is a default vanilla platform, no policies applied, and it looks like it's passed. I've just specified the default IPs, by the way, which is a crazy amount, 65,000, which I'm not going to need. So I'm going to just do a create and just wait for that to finish, and let's see if that works. Okay, so we can see that's created now. So if I go, let's look at that resource group, and we can see that's been created in Japan West. And then if I just do a refresh, we should see the network. I can see my network here is it's in Japan West. There's nothing in the platform to stop me by default creating what I want, where I want. So this can happen to your users as well. So that's where policy comes in. So if we take a look at that policy, if I go to, let's go to the policy blade here. And then if we look at assignments, and let's look at the top level, we're going to assign this right up here. We don't need to, but just if you're that kind of organization that no matter what, you're going to want this policy in place, what we can do is assign a policy. There is a default, a built-in one as well that we can use. So if we look in here, we don't want any exclusions, basics policy definition. Let's do a search, see if we can find it. Allowed locations, click that. Okay, next. Scope everywhere, right at the tenant root. Parameters, so this is where we select what's allowed. So let's say in this case, we only want UK South and West. Next. And we're just going to fly through this. We can even put our own custom message on here. Let's say it is policy of, let's say, a fictional name. And then let's go and create that policy and assign it. So that's actually now assigned. We can see that policy is now assigned at the tenant root, which kind of matches our slide here. We've got that policy assigned here. And let's check that now. So eventually what will happen, there's a compliance center here as well, and we'll see my locations. It's not actually run just yet. So what it'll do is it generally runs after 24 hours. You can manually trigger it as well. There are a few other ways and events that can trigger these policies as well out of the box. But what we can try and do now, if I go back to here and try and create another VNet, for example, and let's see if it's already kicked in. So I'm going to just use the resource group I already had, VNet2, and let's do next. Let's run in a validation again. So you can see that in real time, I've only just applied that policy and it's got a validation failed. So if I click that, and I can see VNet2 was disallowed by policy. Reason is because it is a policy of Contoso that no resources are allowed to be built outside the UK. So that's my specific custom message that I've put on there. So the user will say, oh, okay, it's a message from my company, so it's not just a random default message. So they're more likely to say, all right, okay, they'll go and think about what they're supposed to be doing. So that's just an example of how policy works. And we can see that inheritance has also worked all the way down to my subscription, which is one level down from here. In terms of hierarchy, so you want to keep it as flat as possible, really. You can go 6 levels deep. So what's a policy initiative? An initiative is basically a collection of policies. So you may have a policy which is a rule, and then you can have a collection of them. So this box here, we can have, there's a bunch of built-in initiatives for compliance reasons. You could have ISO, there's like a UK official one for NHS and healthcare organisations. There's PCI DSS, there's loads of them. What you can do is you can assign that policy at the root as well if you want to, and then what that gives you kind of auditability of those regulations. So I'm just going to, and you can see that they're all audit policies as well. So they don't ensure, so this is something to know, they don't actually make you compliant with CIS, for example. All they're doing is just auditing against that. So it gives you kind of a view of where you stand. So let's also look at policy exclusions. In this example, we can see we've applied, we've got a Defender policy here as well. So you may want to assign a policy that enables Microsoft Defender for cloud and all your subscriptions. Kind of generally good practice to do that. If someone infiltrates one of your subscriptions, they could potentially have access to other ones. And there's also this one here, for example. Another good one could be disallow public IP addresses. So you may not want people to create things and assign a public IP address to resources in your environment to allow direct access from the internet. It's generally not something that you'd want to do. You may want to go through a firewall. So in this case, you could have a firewall in the connectivity subscription and resource group, and you can just create an exclusion. So when you apply that, you'd create an exclusion for the connectivity or the resource group where the firewall is, or even down to the public IP address of the firewall if you wanted to as well. So you can go that down to that level. And then if anybody else goes and creates a public IP, so let's say by default someone creates a virtual machine, the default settings will allow you to go and create a public IP address, and that'll be accessible over the internet, therefore potentially giving someone access into your private networks. So one really powerful way to kind of block that kind of access is to apply a disallow public IP address resource type at this level, and it will filter all the way down. Another reason why you want us to use management groups is for role-based access. So for example, we've got some standard roles. We've got a whole list of standard roles that we apply. You can have platform administrators, security administrators, readers, and billing admins, for example. There's a bunch of built-in roles that kind of are built for these kind of users. So your security admins can all go into this group here, for example, and they'll be able to see all the security information all the way through your environment now. You can also then, if you've got specific applications in your landing zones, here, for example, you've got a dev data environment here. You can have your application owners just assigned access at that level or even further down into the resource group level. So that's a good way to manage access to your environments as well, using Entra ID groups rather than individual users where possible. Another a good feature is custom roles. So you could create a specific custom role. So this could be for your owners, the top one here, and then you could have your users with slightly less permissions or customized permissions. So they can only, let's say, view a SQL server, but actually make some minor changes to a database or a web application or a VM, but they can't change the SKU, for example. Just an example. There's lots of different rules that you can apply here. A good practice is for custom roles to create that custom role, and it's kind of a definition. It's a JSON definition. You'd set that and store it high up in the hierarchy. So you might put that your root. That means that that role is available for you to apply anywhere in that tree. Sometimes you could lock yourself into a corner here, kind of. So, for example, you could create a custom role and store the definition under Sandbox, for example. And then you'd have a subscription layer. You try and move that subscription layer. And then when you try and move that subscription layer, you could have some issues because the custom role assigned to the subscription is at this scope instead of something higher up. So you just have to fiddle around, remove that scope, remove that role, for example, and then move it. But it's just something to be aware of. Budget alerts as well. So the third thing, you've got policies and you've got role-based access. Another thing is budget alerts. So in this case, we've gone another level down in management groups. We've got our sales and marketing. So they've got different web applications. They may be doing some campaigns, for example, and you may want to set budget alerts on that. So we know we only want to spend X amount per month for all the subscriptions in here. Of course, you can set alerts further down at the subscription level, but you can also set it up here as well. So we know that department has got a limit, and we want to know about it when they start getting close to it and when they hit it as well. Now, we can also manage these management groups via code. In this example, what we're doing here is we create the management group. So what we do is pass in the subscription IDs. Each subscription's got an ID, and we pass that into a script. So this is a bicep script. So what we're saying is create a resource called management group. That's the name of it. And where's it going to live? The parent ID is the customer root, so the one under the tenant root in this case. And the same here, we're going to create a management group called platform under the customer root again. So that's your creation of your management groups. And then what you would do is have your subscription IDs, you pass those in, and then you'd say, okay, my identity subscription is going to live under the identity management group. So that's the parent. So each subscription can only have one parent. A management group can have multiple children. That's kind of how that works, and they all must be part of the same as your AD or as your Entra ID tenant. Okay, here's an example. So we've got no structure here, so that's a common thing. So what we'll do is we'll run that script in the next demo and show you how it just reorganizes these management groups and subscriptions. So we've going to flip over to a quick demo now on running that code that we looked at. So we just looked at the code to create the management groups and also place the subscriptions under those management groups with the parent IDs. I've got my glamorous assistant Connor here to talk us a little bit through how we run that through the Azure DevOps. So we've seen the files, but let's just take a quick look at running it in DevOps. So hi Connor, if you could just take us to where the pipelines are and just let's have a quick look in there.
Yeah, of course. So we have a number of our pipelines here in Azure DevOps. Obviously the one we'll be looking at right now will be the management groups one.
Excellent. So go for it. So that one just kind of a definition of what it's going to do. So yeah, I think if you hit that edit button, then just give us a quick whirlwind of what that's doing there.
Yeah, so very basic pipeline in this case, just a couple of stages and jobs to do. We essentially, the kind of two major portions of this are the replace tokens. So it goes into the parameter file for the deploy management groups, and essentially goes and grabs replacement variables from the library in the Azure DevOps. Rather than using hard-coded things in each of the files, we have it pull from kind of a source, this library source. It's a bit easier
Yeah.
to modify and manage.
So,
Once it's done that, it then essentially runs a small little line of PowerShell, or in this case CLI, that goes and deploys that bicep file, as well as the parameter file that now has those newly grabbed parameters from the library.
okay, cool. So is it worth having just a quick look at the variables just to say where we get the subscription IDs from? Is that easy to see?
We can do.
So they're under libraries. Yeah, so down there we've got subscription IDs and things like that. Oh, great. Okay, so if we go back to the pipeline then, so let's see us running that pipeline, and then we'll see the end results. So what we're doing here is just showing the thing being updated, the management groups and subscriptions being reorganized using the code. So yeah, if we can run that, and then we'll just look at the results in a bit. Okay, that looks like it's completed. It took about 3 minutes to do the whole thing. And what it's done is created all the management groups and moved the subscriptions to the areas that we wanted to move them into, or to the parent management group. So, Connor, let's just take a quick look at that structure now and look at where the subscriptions are.
Yeah, let's do that. Give us a refresh where we were.
Yeah, cool. Great. So now we've got the customer route there, landing zones. Excellent platform. Okay, mine's in there. Good stuff. All right, so we can see how we can manage this via code. And if you need to make any changes, it's just a case of updating the parameter files and ensuring we've got the right management groups and change the parent. And we just run it again. It will put everything in the right place. So yeah, that's really good, Connor. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Yep. Thanks very much. Cheers. Okay, thanks for sticking with us so far. So just to finish off, what we'll do is we'll take a look at the documentation, the official documentation, where it all is and where you can find out more. And that, if you go to aka.ms/CAF, so for the Cloud Adoption Framework, we click on that, and we'll be able to look at our way around the CAF. We can do another session on it and all the details of this thing, but for now, we'll do, what we're looking at is kind of a landing zone design areas which kind of fit under the ready phase of the CAF. So if we go into there, and if we look at the design areas, so what the things that we've been talking about here is the Azure enterprise scale kind of model here. We can see that we've also got Visio files in there if you want to use Microsoft one. So these are all the design areas. There's lots of guidance here across all the various areas of things that you need to think about when you're doing your cloud adoption. But what we've been talking about today is the management group area. So that comes under resource organization. So if we look under there and look at management groups, so if we look under here, we'll find all the details of management groups, all the best practices, kind of all the things that we've talked about today, but a lot more detail and directly from Microsoft as well. So yeah, enjoy, have a good read of that, and thanks very much again for sticking with us, and hopefully you found that useful. Thanks again.